You know, it's funny how plans work. I had this idea to do a 50th episode special, which was going to be a 3-parter with Abominus, which is why you might be able to see him over there, partially unassembled, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen, because there's a complaint going around about the recent Siege Starscream. I recently picked him up as an impulse purchase from one of the stores near where I work. I wasn't really planning on getting him in the first place. He didn't really look that good in promotional photos, especially in the in-hand photos. The way he transformed seemed a bit wonky, the choice of alt mode was baffling. But he was there, surprisingly. Looks like Australia just skipped Wave 1. Thanks, General Retail, for f***ing us over again. I kinda thought, he's there, might as well grab him because someone else bought the Soundwave. That is beside the point though, because what I'm seeing lately is a lot of complaints about the Siege Starscream figure, mainly the chest. I'm enjoying the figure pretty well, it's going quite fine, but then I hop online and oh look, everyone's saying they're not going to purchase it because the chest keeps falling off. Are they serious? Not purchasing a figure simply because of one tiny issue? It's weird. They're saying they absolutely love everything about the way it looks and the way it transforms, but the chest is the deal breaker. Something so simple. You know what? I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to set things right. I know this wasn't a planned review. In fact, at the time of filming this, I haven't actually written a script yet. But regardless, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Siege Starscream. So the promotion shots for Siege Starscream come out, and by god they all look terrible. The jet mode looked squished, the junk under the wings was insane, and the chest on the back was a crazy case of kibble. Cut to a few months later, and oh shit, it actually looks pretty snazzy. I mean, it's far from perfect, but it's oozing with traditional 80s charm in a way that Power of the Primes just wasn't able to. Of course, I'm talking about the line as a whole, because Power of the Prime Starscream on his own is just the worst. What once looked boxy and clunky now looks clean and aerodynamic. Yes, there's a bit of kibble on the bottom here, but if you bring in some other Seeker molds, you'll begin to notice that you've pretty much got the same thing going on with all of them. It's par for the course for a jet mode. The only difference here is that we're seeing a jet that hasn't really been done properly before. I mean, I guess there were the Galaxy Force Tetrajets, but those don't really count. And the Impossible Toys ones back in the day were problematic, to say the least. As a matter of fact, seeing this alt mode done well is a nice breath of fresh air after the dead trail that was the Mars Toys Renegade project. I actually backed that one, so the almost certain cancellation has ruffled my jimmies just a little bit. Back on topic though, this guy's unmistakably Tetrajet Starscream. The colours are absolutely on point, and the surface detail on this thing is immaculate. Gone are the boring flat surfaces of Power of the Primes and modern masterpiece figures. This is what I live for. This is robotic tooling. What really sells it for me is the use of the clear plastic window. It evokes the nose cone from Starscream's traditional design without going overboard. And if you're curious as to where the traditional chest ended up, well, they formed thrusters on the back. When this was first announced, I positively hated this design, including a fake chest on a Seeker. Why, that's absolutely absurd! But to be honest, this isn't a fake chest. We've seen what a real chest on a Tetrajet would do on a robot mode, and it ain't pretty. This way the parts are properly incorporated into the vehicle mode. I will say though, the colour placement isn't that great. I'm sure it'll end up looking much better in blue and eventually purple and black. Please Hasbro, I'm sick and tired of you leaving all your Seekers unfinished! But right here, it's just okay, I guess. Whilst on the topic of colours, this is one of my gripes with the figure. This guy needs more paint, and I mean a lot more paint. I'm not going to criticise the weathering effects because, although they aren't very good, they do evoke a nostalgia for the classic Star Wars toys that I had growing up. That said, the effect comes at the cost of giving the wings no colour breakup whatsoever. Although the moulding is absolutely exquisite, the detail often gets lost in this sea of grey. Starscream has always had tampos on the wings, as he should. He's a narcissist, he's not about being sneaky. Even in the movie version, at least for the second and third films, the designers hinted at him having a huge ego by giving him tattoos. Any incarnation of him would probably end up doing that if it meant stroking his own ego. Out of everything this figure does right and wrong, this is by far the most frustrating element. It's the only thing pushing this alt mode into truly memorable territory. The worst part is that the robot mode has a lot of colour breakup, but the jet doesn't get any of this. And yes, repro labels might fix it, but at what cost? Everyone's hating on the weathering details, so repro labels will inevitably cover it up and turn it into a boring generic G1 cartoon-inspired chunk of genericism. I suppose that's the way it is, though. I'm pretty much the only one who enjoys weathering effects, so away it goes in the next line anyway. In terms of size comparisons, there's no denying that Siege figures are smaller. Sure, they are denser by consequence, but it might be a downside for some people. Personally, I don't mind it, but I can see where they're coming from. That said, if you complain about the Prime Wars trilogy being too hollow, and then complain about the size and price increase with Siege, well then maybe reevaluate your collecting habits. So yes, unfortunately, War for Cybertron Siege Starscream is a shellformer. Except there's a bit of a difference between this kind of shellformer and the Bumblebee kind of shellformer. This is inspired. Bumblebee was a lazy hack job. I'd much rather see shellformers done like this than I would like Bumblebee. Also, one quick note, I just realized most of my images or most of my footage came without the null rays. I forgot to have them attached in all the other pieces of footage. So here they are with the null rays. I don't really think it looks complete without the null rays here, but unfortunately you have to remove them. You have to parts form them. I'm not too frustrated because pretty much every mainline Seeker has had to parts form its null rays, but you know, they could have kind of re-engineered it because that's the port and that's the port. And I mean, if you want them to be arm mounted, you can just mount them on the arms, which might be better overall. In fact, I'll get into why it might be better to arm mount them later on. Regardless, the other main issue people have is the chest. Apparently it's very loose, it flops off very easily. I'm not seeing it. I mean, it is a little loose, but I don't think it's detrimental to the entire figure. The first step is actually taking the chest off, so you do that, you bring the chest down, and then you can just leave it like that. See, it hasn't fallen off. I mean, if you wiggle it off, yes, it does eventually fall off and can come off. Actually, it's staying pretty strong. There we go. Yeah, I mean, it can come off, but it's not that big of a deal. I think people are making way too big of a deal out of this than they should. Regardless, that just stays there. And then you can take this up here. You have to make sure this is up here before you actually start collapsing the backpack with everything else. Otherwise, things are going to get a bit messy later on. You bring these up, you then just angle a little bit up, and yes, he's got a huge undercarriage, but every Seeker in history has. So you'll notice that's unpegged from that, and then you unpeg the arms from that, and then you'll come around, you'll take the feet and undo them, and you know what's really awesome about this? Spring-loaded calf hollowness fillers. Utterly brilliant. That touch is so good. I really want them to use this on other Transformers. Think about how cool that would have been if that was in Titan's Return. That would have been bloody awesome, but I'm so glad to see it here, because you're going to have it nice and flush there, and then the moment it comes out, that just comes out and fills everything out. Whilst you're at the legs, you bring the heel spurs out the back, and you bring the front feet out like that. Very Masterpiece Seeker style, but it comes with something much better than the Masterpiece, foot posability, but we'll get to that later. Now, you bring the waist around here, and you'll notice there's actually a tiny little filler over here. And that's another brilliant little touch. Another thing that was taken from Make Toys' Howling Meteor. In fact, now that I think about it, this calf filler thing is very much like the spring-loaded calf filler from Make Toys' Howling Meteor. There's a lot that they took from that figure. I mean, it's perfectly fine. Hasbro, third party takes from Hasbro, so Hasbro can take from third party. It's perfectly fine. You bring the arms back, you bring the chest part down, and that'll also bring the head up, and then the chest clips, well, that needs to be all the way down, then the chest can clip into place. And then that's solid. You don't need to worry about anything else going wrong. After you've pushed this down, it'll actually bring the head just up enough for you to clip that in. But you also want to come around to the back and untab this from the head. It's a bit tight, actually. That'll just fold into the back of the torso. Now this is where the really cool part with the shell happens. You take the cockpit, you split it, and it forms his shoulder pylons. Well, not quite yet. First off, you want to bring this down just a bit. If you push these in first, it can actually lock it in place. Whereas if you bring it down just a bit first, then do it, it all lines up smoothly, and it clicks into place. And then this comes in, and it forms an incredibly cohesive backpack.
I mean, that doesn't look like a shellformer at all. The wings are done ridiculously well. The use of the nose cone for the shoulder pylons, it's just a brilliant transformation. Although we're not quite done yet, we finally need to fix up the arms. There's a panel here, unclip it, bring out the hand, undo that, which is very much like Generations Warpath, and then you close it again. Same here. You can then place these over here. I prefer to put them on the forearms, but I'll explain why later. And there you have it. Siege Starscream in his bloody awesome robot mode. Now that is a seeker. Is he better than the Masterpiece version? Yes. Is he better than the RID Deluxe version? Yes. Is he better than the Classics version? Yes. Is he better than Howling Meteor? I don't have Howling Meteor, but I don't think he would be. But he's a fantastic seeker for what he is, and I am really excited to talk about the robot mode.
By all accounts, this robot mode shouldn't work. It's a much blockier version of the 1984 design, a design which is supposed to be slender and aerodynamic. The feet are ripped straight from the Masterpiece version, which is known for having issues with posability. The entire chest isn't formed from the nose cone, which traditionally makes for a flat design. But somehow, against all odds, I really like this figure. It does have its fair share of issues, but honestly, this right here is how you do a shell former. Wacky alt mode, engaging transformation that doesn't rely purely on shell, and a bot mode that still manages to look clean. Right, Bumblebee? Take a look at this backpack. Do you see anything wrong with it? No? Well, that's because it's completely clean. The shell becoming the pylons is a brilliant choice, and the wing profile being a bit further back doesn't bother me at all. The backs of the legs remain clean too. Right, Bumblebee? Yes, I already outlined it in the transformation, but I really have to stress that this spring-loaded thigh filler gimmick is incredible. I really want to see this get used again and again on other figures that need to do a similar leg fold scheme. In the future, it would be a great way to get around the infamy of Time's Return. I mean, Time's Return was great and all, probably the best in the entire trilogy, but we all know it had its issues. The head sculpt on its own is alright, just alright. It seems a bit generic, almost too young for the old scheming screamer that we've all come to hate. But what's important to note is the return of the one, the only, the glorious Light Piping. Oh my god, how I've missed you! Thank you, Hasbro. Thank you for finally returning us to the promised land. John Warren, I could kiss you. I'm gonna switch things up just for a bit, because the final positive, and personally what I think is the most important of this figure, would be the posability. In a sense, posability is the gimmick of this line. Hasbro has really outdone themselves in the main line. Every single figure is filled to the brim with joints, and not a single toy deluxe and up uses ball joints, except on the heads. Now, I never really hated ball joints, but I'll be the first to admit that sometimes they cause issues. That said, there's something premium about the way they've designed this joint system. The Takara designers credit this to the weight of the armor provided by parts formers, meaning that they physically couldn't put ball joints on, otherwise it would collapse under its own weight. But it also has the dual purpose of satisfying a vocal minority of collectors who hate ball joints. Yes, there's actually a group of collectors who think the concept is cheap. Not sure why they'd think that, but regardless of whether we have ball joints or not, the posability is off the charts. The head is on a ball joint, the wings have hinges, and they can swivel 90 degrees. It looks completely ridiculous, but it highlights the stability. But it highlights the stability of the. But it highlights the stability. Wow, that's got to be literally the hardest line I've ever recorded. I don't know why I can't say that. But it highlights the stability of the figure. But it highlights the stability of the figure. But it highlights the stability. The shoulders are on universal joints and also have an outward hinge. Brilliant touch. He also has a bicep swivel, a double-jointed elbow, inward motion on the wrist, and a wrist swivel. Seriously, we're only halfway through and is already blowing all previous voyages out of the water. And you haven't even seen anything yet. The waist swivels, although sometimes it can get hampered by the backpack. That said, he does have that thing where the backpack comes off and forms the entirety of the alt mode. I'll be honest though, it looks f***ing ridiculous. The legs are on universals, but for some reason they lock up at times in both directions. It's almost as if they planned on using ratchet joints, but decided against it. Very strange indeed. Fortunately, the thigh swivel works easily, and, in a stroke of genius, due to the spring-loaded panel, his knee bends to an insane angle. And as the icing on the cake, the feet include ankle tilts both outward and forward. The feet are ridiculously sturdy, so no matter what pose you put him in, he will maintain his stature with no issues whatsoever. Honestly, this posability makes the figure. On his own, he's an alright purchase, but not an absolute necessity, especially with his colours. However, throw these poses in the mix and you've got yourself an absolute winner. There are issues though. In this mode, they are few, being far less than the jet mode, but they can't be as easily ignored as the chest that people seem to be going nuts over. The three, in order of least impactful to most, are the lack of paint, the Decepticon symbol, and the guns. Again, just like the vehicle mode, there's not a lot of paint breakup outside of the battle damage. Thankfully, the plastic breaks up the colours, but especially when we have this huge slab of red in the middle, he can look cheap under certain conditions. As much as I like the choice to make him look all scuffed up, it is detrimental to the paint budget, and I would have loved to have seen more deliberate paint applications. It's ignorable under the right pose though. What's not so ignorable are the Decepticon symbols. I'm okay with them using the cartoon style for these, but these are just way too tiny! We've got tons of open space on these wings, and yet this is where they choose to put it? Come on, man, the big con symbol on the wings is Seeker iconography. It doesn't have to be upside down if the designers don't want it to be, it just has to be visible. And finally, the guns. These are, strangely enough, by far the worst part of the figure, in more ways than one. I'm okay with them not looking like traditional null rays, but by God, add some paint to these. Make them black, or gunmetal, or just paint the barrel, just something. Also, the way they're profiled makes them stick out way too far from the body. They look more like add-ons taken from another figure rather than a deliberate weapon inclusion. Ironically, they end up looking way better on his forearms than his shoulders, doing it Prime style. And to be honest, the fit is way better too. When you try to plug them into the shoulders, you quickly notice how loose they are. My copy is tight enough to hold a basic pose, but this is probably an individual results may vary type of situation, so you may end up with a copy that doesn't hold them at all. The reason it's this way is because of how it's designed. It's not the weapons themselves, but rather the 5mm port. It's not a complete circle, but rather formed by both sides of the shoulder, which themselves are screwed together. This means Hasbro can't just fix it down the line. It's a design flaw that would literally mean redesigning the entire shoulder, which would probably hamper the posability or introduce hollowness, or both. If anything, this is much more of a deal breaker than the chest. Although it doesn't really break the whole deal, I still love the figure anyway. At the very least, the chest stays in place in both modes though. This is just loose. But with that all said and done, the good definitely outranks the bad. The design is still as iconic as ever, and even with the artistic liberties taken, I feel he's one of the better examples of what Siege is trying to achieve. A Cybertronian take on a traditional character. He's not the best figure of the line, but he definitely embodies the ideologies the best. So far, him and Prime are the only two large-scale figures I've gotten. Given that Australian retail seems to have a fear for Wave 1. Stand with your brothers! When I got Prime, I liked him, and I think he's definitely better than Starscream overall, but I felt he was having a bit of an identity crisis. I might do a proper review and get more in depth someday, but the long and short of it is, he's got an awesome alien vehicle mode, but the robot mode is just so steeped in G1 aesthetics it comes across as jarring. Starscream nails his aesthetic though. You can tell who he is and who he will become when he reaches Earth, but at the same time he's got his own style. The designers clearly had to rethink how the transformation would work, given that he's a tetrajet, not a traditional Earth plane. The design philosophy heavily influenced every facet of the robot mode, and we get something familiar but still unique. This is what I want from Generations, not some half-assed recreation of what was once popular. I want new, nuanced designs of older characters, maybe throwing in some more obscure ones in the mix. And I don't know about you, but I reckon that this will look pretty good as Red Wing. Sure, this isn't a perfect mold, but it's a hell of a lot better than the Classics mold. I don't have it on me right now. I put it into storage a month ago.
So, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that the chest issue isn't that bad, the transformation is ingenious, the alt mode is lovely, he's got a great nostalgic charm to him, the blocky aesthetic comes through alright, but the posability really sells it. Yes, the head sculpt's a bit annoying, but damn, that shoulder pylon transformation is brilliant. So, I'd say he's a winner. I really don't get the complaints about this figure. I mean, look at that! It's not falling off! It's not falling off, it's still right there! I mean, he even cleans up absolutely perfectly. So why would you put so much anger at a figure that does so much right? He's a love letter to Transformers of the classics and early generations lines, before it went to utter full of Cybertron and then stumbled through the Prime Wars trilogy. I think especially the way the legs are built with their amazing posability in the feet and their spring-loaded calf fillers,
It just shows that there was so much care put into this figure, and consequently, so much care put into the Siege line overall. Except for Prowl. I don't know what really happened with that. It's weird, a lot of people on social media have been telling me that I've been a bit critical of Hasbro over the past few months, probably because my only real review was the Studio Series World War II Bumblebee, and yes, I really didn't like that figure, but I'm not one to be third-party elitist or Hasbro apologist. I acknowledge a good product, and this right here is a very good product. If anything, it's kind of fortuitous that I reviewed him right after Studio Series Bumblebee, because it proves that just because it's a shellformer doesn't mean it has to be a bad figure. But until they give us more Seekers, I'll stay here enjoying Siege, because it's been a cracker of a line so far.